Northwest Caucasian languages are reputed to, or are known really, to be very sparing in the use of vowels. And effectively, that is a characteristic of Indo-European in the sense that they have many consonant clusters. You see, if you compare Indo-European with Uralic or with Dravidian, you do find that those languages, and indeed very many languages in the whole world, have a pattern of consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. By contrast, in Sanskrit especially, because you see many of the derived languages again fall back in that pattern of consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel.
So now we come to a new section which is about contemporary scholarships. So in the recent years we have had the discovery of various steppe cultures. So what are the implications of the discovery of these steppe cultures for the homeland question of Indo-European languages and their dispersal?
Yes, well, you know, first of all, the fact that they are there is not sensational. I mean, of course, you know, there was space, so people ended up living there. That's not special. One thing that is being quoted regularly is that there are clearly connections with Vedic culture. And that's fine. So these are always interpreted, you see, this proves, you know, these are the Vedic people on the way to India. Well, here you see chronology is devastating to that theory because the Vedic people were in India already well before 1500 BC, wherever they came from.
Okay.
And so you could just as well say, or ultimately you could only say, that these must be the Vedic people on the way from India.
Rather than to India.
Yes. The rest of the talk could be about the chronology, because you see, this is something that is totally neglected by the Aryan invasion camp. It is the chronology that plays a very decisive role. You see, to say there was an invasion in the second millennium BCE, you have to assume that there were no Vedic people in India before that. One argument that is used in this sense, there was one body analyzed that was found in Rakhigarhi,
Okay.
the biggest Harappan city, one of the oldest also, and in the middle of the Vedic heartland.
Okay. In Haryana. In Haryana.
Yes. And so that corpse turned out to be totally Harappan, no steppe contribution. And so many Indians jubilated, this proves there was no Aryan invasion. You know, to which, you know, the answer is given, for instance, by Martin Kummel, one of the great Indo-Europeanists back in Europe, that on the contrary, this is suggestive of an Aryan invasion.
Yes.
It means that whatever steppe element is present in the Indian population now was not there before 1500, let's say 2000 BCE. And so before that you had non-steppe Indians,
Exactly.
which is exactly what the Aryan invasion theory says. So what you could say instead is that these steppe invasions are real, but they came too late for Vedic culture, which was already present in India. So this was a woman, I think, that had been analyzed lived already in a Vedic society, was totally uncontaminated by this Central Asia contribution, but nevertheless she was already Vedic. That was her cultural horizon. And to prove that, you have to look at Indian, not only material culture that archaeology can find, you have to read the texts. And so there you find a lot, as momentously Shrikant Talagiri has shown, already since 2000, so the other side has had plenty of time to get to know this, where he shows that there are actually a number of scriptural, literary indications for a considerably higher chronology.
Okay. Yeah, we will come to that.
Yes.
We will come to that eventually when we come to the India focus section. But right now, I think, however, it is sort of clear, I think, or at least it's a matter of consensus, that it is the steppe influx that brought the Indo-European languages to Europe. Does the chronology fit there?
Yes, that chronology fits. According to Talagiri's chronology, confirmed from totally different angles, from archaeoastronomy, for instance, even as worked out by people who were not busy with the homeland discussion at all, like Aryan Iyengar from Bengaluru. So this would be the Vedas starting in about 3300 BCE. This starts with King Bharata, after whom India is named Bharat. And we have, thanks to the king list in the Puranas, which, as Egypt and Mesopotamia teach us, where you have a parallel situation with king lists, are a pretty reliable source of history.
Okay.
And, especially if you look at the culture of those days, to them this was extremely important. You see, that was the job of these poets and chroniclers and so on, to perpetuate the memory of their king. And so we have this testimony also in the Rig Veda, that a bit before the Rig Veda, a few generations earlier, the way we talk about Napoleon or Stalin or so, there was a conflict with the Drugyu tribe, and the Drugyus are winning. Then the Paurava tribe, to which King Bharata belongs, the king at the time has a brother-in-law with the Solar dynasty, and so he comes to his rescue and wins the battle against the Drugyu tribe, and the Drugyu tribe is expelled from India. And so they leave northwest and they end up in Central Asia and so on. And so it's described that they went northwest and they set up kingdoms there. So the first one is exactly on the way out of India, is Gandhara. Gandhara is named after the king of the Drugyu tribe at that time. And so that lies near what is now Rawalpindi in Pakistan. So just next to the Khyber Pass, they're leaving. And so they arrive in the Yamnaya area, like just in time to enter Europe. Now, of course, they're not the only ones to enter Europe. You see, there is a vast immigration, and here I can really say, without fear of being contradicted, invasion into Europe. Now here, of course, there is a lot to be reconstructed. This is very, very, very provisional. And so I don't say that the Drugyu tribe went from India into Europe. There are a lot of stages in between. And they had time enough to mix with local populations and so on. So little of Indian genes will be found in Europe, but the language, yes. Now, that's a bit provisional in the sense that, I'm open to alternatives, but so far, in terms of literary evidence, that is the best we have. Meanwhile, also supported a little bit by archaeological evidence.
Okay.
So, archaeologically, there's every reason to say there was no immigration or invasion into India. But to say that there was a migration from India, that's harder. Indian archaeologists are not very active in Central Asia. So inside India, there's more than enough to do, of course. But you see, there you don't find this expected evidence for immigration. The other way is more difficult. First, something about the Indian archaeologists. Recently, someone, David Mino, produced a video in which he takes issue with my statement that most Indian archaeologists don't believe in the Aryan invasion. This is something that I myself have noticed in different archaeology conferences. Yet, he says, you see, in academic publications you don't find that. And so there are some, like Michel Danino, like the late Bibi Lal, who do go very explicit on no Aryan invasion. On the contrary, the Vedic civilization is totally native. It's in fact not the Indus civilization, but part of the Indus civilization. But yeah, there are many who avoid the topic, and there are good, psychological and social reasons to explain that.
Or maybe, if you are looking at something, say in the Janapada era, it is simple to write 1500 BC after Aryan invasion. We have in 500 BC the Janapadas. So that would be just a matter of received wisdom.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be, any kind of kowtowing to any other theory. It's a matter of received wisdom because 1500 BC is supposed to be the Aryan invasion, at least into India.
Yes.
But regarding the Drukyu tribes' migration to the northwest, now, if that model is correct, then it means that the people who actually emigrated would have been elites. Because would have been elites.
Yes.
Elites who set up kingdoms. Because we have this setting up kingdoms, phenomenon of setting up kingdoms by different branches of royalty in the medieval era, where Rajputs, because of infighting, they leave one place and they found another kingdom.
Yeah.
So this is clear. So the entire population has not emigrated.
Like Nepal has been
Rajputized by the Ranas.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and the Rajputs are the people who have founded a lot of kingdoms in the medieval times. So if you assume that something similar happens, it means that the population is not going lock, stock and barrel with them. So they would have encountered different populations, and as elites, they would have been less numerous than the native population. So here you have a very interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, when they encounter all these Central Asian cultures, if that is the way Europe got Indo-Europeanized, then they have to change the languages of those cultures. Sufficient number of people in those cultures. On the other hand, we have evidence from the Mitanni tablets in West Asia, where you find merely Indian names or Indian looking names, Indo-Aryan names, but they are all part of a Hurrian text, right? So don't you think that is a more likely scenario than being able to spread Indo-European all the way to Europe?
Well, we have evidence for both. Both happen. So, yeah, you have, of course, evidence of adaptation by the elites to the people, like the Mongols are example par excellence. They get Persianized in Persia, and they become Chinese in China, and so on. Yes. So that is one possibility. The other also happens. In Turkey, for example, a large part of the population is Greek or pre-Greek, but speaking Greek at the time of the Turkish invasions.
Good.
And so there you get a mixed picture. And the wife of a friend of mine is a midwife, and she says that quite a percentage of Turkish immigrant children in Belgium still do have some mark on their back, some physical mark that Mongols have, that Europeans don't have. And so these Turkish children still have it after so many generations. So you get a mixed picture. I mean, it's not, can't be simplified. It's like that. So at any rate, you see the Indian element is going to thin out the more
farther
they
you go.
move west. Yes, but I mean, it's an important point, of course. Nobody's looking for it. That helps explain why nobody finds it, but still, I mean, the genetic research is fairly objective, and so it would show up one day if there is a clear Indian element there. At least archaeologically, there is more material. So there we have the work of the Russian scholar Semenenko.
Alexander
Semenenko.
Yes.
He has been working specifically on this. His first great achievement, if it is correct, of course, is showing that Sintashta in that area is not, as is now always accepted, is not the Vedic people on the way to India. And that a number of inventions that are attributed to them are not really what they are claimed to be. He says that the chariots in Sintashta are hardly chariots, though they are wheeled vehicles. And they are definitely not the same that you find back in India, like in Sanauli. But so he works further and then starts to look for traces of the Drugyu or whoever Aryan, emigrants from India. So that's a work in progress that's hardly begun. And from the side of Western scholarship, I don't see anyone jumping at it as, oh, this is interesting, let's find out what is really there. And they may be skeptical, you see, they may not believe it, but at least they should be curious. What is going on here? Which, by the way, is a comment I have to make on the whole Indo-Europeanist world. You see, they are not intrigued. You see, they see that these crazy Indians are always talking about no Aryan invasion, out of India, that's it. And nobody's working on that. All the time they say, oh yeah, there is a big debate about the homeland. What they mean is the debate between the north of the Black Sea and the Caucasus versus the south of the Black Sea and the Caucasus. So that's a legitimate debate that's going on. There is a debate going on. Mm-hmm. Nobody talks about the Indian side.
Okay.
And here, I have to notice that while I don't see much of it about a number of people I personally know in Indo-Europeanist circles, it has percolated quite a bit that Indians have vicious political motives and they say just anything, and even people like Bibi Lal have been infected with this, and that's why they turned away from the Aryan invasion and so on. So the worst case so far, I think, is about a year and a half ago, a book was published about the homeland puzzle word you have to look for if you Google is puzzle, Indo-European puzzle, by Christiansen, Elst, it's a difficult name, Welleslav, and Huus Kronen. So they all work in Scandinavia. And so they have edited a book with, I think, 33 contributions by different scholars from different fields. Nothing about India is being said in all the research papers.
Correct.
Which, I mean, it's their choice what they want to write about. But so India has not intrigued them as a possible candidate for homeland. And then the editors, you see, after having thoroughly read each of the papers, they conclude that, they conclude in favor of, some Western homeland, but they also conclude that you have to be very careful because there are evil, vicious Nazi motives behind this homeland search. Like, for example, in India, they have this out of India theory, which reminds us of the Nazis. Well, not only is this blatantly untrue, the comparison with the Nazis are squarely, very committedly in the Aryan invasion camp.
Yes.
And
they have to be by definition.
I don't know by definition. Anyway, that's where they were. You see, they thought that the Aryans, meaning the Indo-European speaking people, that was confused in those days, that they came from Europe and they went to Asia. For example, the swastika. You see, right now there is a big debate with American Hindus and so on. They have to face pressure against the swastika. And so they try to get out of the problem by saying, yeah, but swastika and Hakenkreuz is not the same thing. Well, read German texts of those days or even before. They are absolutely the same thing. There are many texts that say, yes, even Hitler himself said that on the temple walls in Japan or in Tibet and so on, you find this Hakenkreuz. What else is meant in the swastika? Okay, anyway. Now, the truth of the matter is that, of course, Hakenkreuz and swastika are exactly the same, but according to Hitler, they didn't come from India or from Japan or anywhere else. They were European symbols. And effectively, you do find swastikas in archaeological sites from Finland to Greece.
Exactly. And even in Harappa.
Yes, of course, but even in America. In Arizona, yes. I've seen, Native Americans with, blankets with swastikas stitched on them and so on. It's a universal symbol, it really is. But so he identified it with Europe. And so he thought that the history of the swastika was that the Aryan invaders started in Europe, took with them their language, but also their swastika, and that's how it ended up in India, and then Buddhists later brought it to Japan and so on. The Nazis were very firm believers in the Aryan invasion theory.
Exactly.
And, Hitler said it in so many words that these Hindus, you see, they are the deplorable end result of a mixture between the noble Aryans and the miserable black, aboriginals. And the result, you see, there are very unhappy people and they have some internal trauma to overcome and so on, and that makes them into almost a second Jewry. Jewish people, which in his mouth was not meant as a compliment.
Compliment, exactly.
Okay. Also, in other statements, you see, he's very disparaging about India and so on. If he had believed that the swastika came from India, he would never have chosen it as his party symbol. And so ultimately, all this is motivated by a belief in the Aryan invasion theory. Now, that doesn't mean that it is correct or incorrect.
Exactly.
But only, you see, it's a very poor starting position to say, oh, the Indians are like the Nazis. Come on. And so the second point about this is, it's not only blatantly wrong. For a scholar, the first thing to remark is that it's not based on anything. For that you have to prove, first of all, that there is a Nazi tendency in India. You look at the career of now Prime Minister Modi. Did he abolish democracy? Did he throw the minorities into the ocean, as I've heard American Indologists predict in the 1990s? No, nothing of that sort. Yes, there are. The copies of Mein Kampf are being sold in India, that is true, but that existed before, the Hindu nationalist government and so on. Has nothing to do with them, and so on. And secondly, you would have to prove that then that ideology somehow motivated scholars to break their scholarly deontology and tailor their findings towards their ideological choice.
Yes.
That's an extremely serious allegation to make against fellow scholars. Extremely serious. So, their vice chancellors, especially their publishers, you see, ought to, think twice
before.
about this. Yes.
And additionally, even if people have a certain ideology, the material facts cannot be changed.
Of course.
The material facts cannot be changed. So even if a German Nazi archaeologist were to come up with a finding that is stratigraphically right and chronologically right, we would have to accept it.
That is, in fact, even though they seem not to be aware of it, their own position, because they are, after all, defending Hitler's theory. I mean, it was not invented by Hitler, but it was espoused by Hitler.
Yes.
And so they don't see any problem in this. They don't mind bad company, because if the facts are there, if the data are there for the theory, then the theory has to be accepted.
It's just that it doesn't work the other way. Then what is known about the language of these steppe cultures?
I've never come across any serious detail. I mean, of course, who was later there, the Trans-Eurasiatic languages, the Uralic languages and so on. The deeper you go into the past, the more doubtful this becomes, although on the other hand, there was less movement in the deep past than is possible in the recent past. So that again makes it more static. But yes, I mean, very certainly there were a number of languages that have gone extinct. Like right now, we can still see that the last remnants of the Yeniseian languages disappearing in Siberia.
Okay.
So that certainly was there. So just like in Europe, you have a substratum in Germanic, for example, that we don't know what language, this language totally lost. Then, secondly, about the Uralic people, it is widely assumed, and probably with good reason, that they were always reindeer, or as far as we can go back, that they were reindeer herders in the northern border of possible human habitation. So they were there in Siberia. And you can see that later when Iranians, namely the so-called Scythians, occupied this whole Central Asia, Eastern Europe, there is a lot of contact between them and the Uralic people, hence a lot of Iranian loans in Uralic. But you see that the pattern of marriages between them, you clearly see that the Iranians are the dominant group. They're more advanced. Many technological things are taken over by the less advanced Uralic people and so on. But there's a clear pattern that has linguistic implications that are verified. I mean, you do see plenty of loans from Iranian in Uralic and not the other way around. Okay. There may have been some, but then you get like the colonial pattern. When the British were in India, when they spoke English among one another, they probably did use quite a few native terms that they had to use all the time when speaking with the natives anyway, but they didn't bring these terms home. You see, in the English language, as taught in schools in Britain, you do find a few Hindi words, but not many.
As Shashi Tharoor pointed out, one of them is loot. There's not much borrowing into English, but there is a lot of borrowing into Indian languages.
Yes, so clearly the Iranians, to adapt a modern term, they colonized Central Asia and Eastern Europe. And so in Hungarian, for example, you have plenty of Iranian words, like sas, meaning shata, meaning 100, for example. And so what that indicates is not the Indo-Iranian branch of Indo-European migrating through the steppes, through Uralic territory down to India, because then they would have borrowed many Uralic words also, which is not the case. There is a list by, I already mentioned him, Václav Blažek. It's not that long. And anyway, for each case, he's a very conscientious scholar, so he gives the different possibilities, and so he suggests, Uralic origins, but he also accepts in many cases, there are other explanations. Mm-hmm. The only one that he sticks to, that he's really firm about, is the word gungu, which has to do with the moon. In its different appearances, it means a lunar phase or a lunar eclipse or a full moon or so, or rather a new moon. Anyway, that is a word that you do find in the Rig Veda, though not in its earliest parts. You have a pattern of three goddesses, Gungu, Sinivali, and Raka. Not in that order. Gungu, Sinivali, Raka. Yes. And so they indicate the waxing moon, the full moon, and the waning moon. Okay, so there's a Gungu among them. And so you find similar sounding words in Samoyedic, which is a branch of Uralic that split off rather early and that has the least commonalities with Indo-Iranian. So he says, this is definitely of Uralic origin. And so if it appears in the Veda, it means that the Vedic people have borrowed it at some point. So this indicates a migration from their Uralic neighbors. Well, you see, if it's one word, every linguist knows that there is such a thing as coincidence. So people are much too eager to seek meaningful etymologies. You see, often you do have, just no reason at all. These two words look the same for no reason.
Yes, homophones.
Yes.
That's it.
That happens. Maybe, some itinerary can be constructed of a common origin. Mm-hmm. It certainly is not enough to necessitate this Indo-Iranian migration. Moreover, it's also a question where the Uralic people ultimately came from.
Okay, so their homeland is also in question.
You see, they came from beyond the Urals. You see, they're from Asia, which means that in Europe, no language is really native even Basque is questioned. You see, maybe, probably also immigrated. So whatever native languages there were have disappeared. So Uralic is not among them. It starts in Asia. And so the question is how north? You see, it is quite possible that they started somewhere in Bactria and that some of them, on a happy summer's day went far north and then they got stuck there and they started reindeer herding, and then that's what they started doing.
Okay.
And those who remained in Bactria, they mixed with, because it's a crossroads, there are always other populations coming. So their language disappeared. It's only the reindeer herders who retained it. And so, that's how this particular word, Gungu, ended up also in the far north.
We don't know.
Not definitively. At any rate, I think that the scenario described, documented fairly thoroughly by Srikantalagiri, that is the one that obtains. Namely, the Iranians colonized this whole area, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, left plenty of words there, and didn't communicate these to, let's say, the Iranian heartland. I mean, in those days, you see, the people in what is now, Kazakhstan, hardly even knew that there was an Iranian empire down south in Iran. And so you see, these words stayed there. And in the heartland, the language evolved and so on, didn't take in these Uralic loans, if at all the Iranians up north did have them. And so they are not part of the history of the Iranian language. And so this Scythian form of Iranian practically disappeared. The only remnant of it today is the Ossetic language in the Caucasus. So probably you see, if you analyze it, it will be very interesting. Maybe you find more there. But I have to confess that I don't know Ossetic.
Okay. So one interesting fact you mentioned is that the Uralic peoples are reindeer herders historically.
Yes.
So, I mean, just like the Indo-Europeans and the horse, do you find linguistic mention of reindeer in their classics or whatever?
Well, their classics, in Finnish, in Hungarian, you get writing from thousands of years later than the period we're now considering.
Okay.
So, I mean, their writing didn't start until mostly because of the Christian monks in Hungary. And then later, you see, when the Soviet Union starts to civilize these Uralic-speaking tribes in northern Russia. So that's very recent. I mean, you don't expect to find any actual written documentation for what ancient Dalit sources. You see, it's not that they were kept from reading, as is often claimed, precisely by themselves, when in fact the British investigations of the native education system, before they replaced it with their own, do show that people of all castes participated in education. And so, you get a lot of warped interpretation of whatever little source there is. Like, for example, I was at some American Indo-Logical conference. No, it was the American Academy of Religion annual conference, but there was some girl who was working on her PhD in Indology from, Telugu speaking. And so she is going to talk about the Purusha Sukta, which is the hymn in the Rig Veda, where for the first time the names of the Varnas
are enumerated.
Okay, the on top, the Brahmins and then the Kshatriyas, and you go down to the Shudras. And then the Panchamas, the fifth caste, is not even mentioned. You see, they were so contemptuous of them that they didn't even mention them. I mean, there is this joke, you see, these Indian archaeologists, they start digging
Ah,
in
yes.
Rakhigarhi, and they find a copper wire. And they say, wow, our ancestors, you see, they already knew electricity. And on the Pakistani side, they're jealous and they say, oh, we also have to find something. They go to Mohenjo-Daro and they start digging.
You find nothing.
And they find no copper wire. And they say, wow, we already had the wireless. You know? So this is a real
that kind of
argument from silence. Okay?
Silence.
So there's no talk about the Dalits. Therefore, you know, yeah, they must have exterminated them, even though today they are alive as well.
But clearly there is no linguistic survival from the Uralic Bronze Age,
Well, no.
as far as we know. So that makes it that much more difficult. So clearly, as far as Bronze Age texts go, would it be fair to say that the Indian Veda, Rig Veda specifically, is the best surviving text of the Bronze Age in Indo-European languages at least?
Well, let me quote Michael Witzel again.
Okay.
He says that if you hear the Vedas being recited today, Tat Savitur Varenyam, you know, what you hear is practically a tape recording from thousands of years ago.
Well, that settles it.
And so they didn't use writing. They may have had writing.
Yeah.
You know, the writing, the Harappan writing may have been their writing. Nevertheless, these verses were learned by heart. And so, and all kinds of techniques were also, mnemo techniques to preserve them carefully, to control one another. Whether there no
It is known as
correcting.
Ghanapatha.
Yeah.
Ghanapatha. So you go syllable by syllable, first three
Yes.
syllables and the next three syllables and so on and so forth, back and forth. So it's pretty complex.
Yes.
But the point is that once you master this, then you are able to find discrepancies that the novice makes.
Yes.
So you can immediately correct it. So it's a correctional mechanism. Whereas
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
wrote something, its pronunciation might change because of way people change.
Yes, and the old, parchment and so on
Yeah,
disappears, so it has to be copied and recopied, and mistakes creep in.
exactly. And
So yes, you see, so that is a quite reliable source. Moreover, it's also reliable in the sense that it's not very prone to the fanciful exaggerations that you find in the Puranas, which were written
much later.
first millennium CE, so fairly recent. And you see, many people say, yeah, but that's not history. The Vedas are not history. That's not a history book. Well, that's what is good about it. You see, it is an innocent source. It did not mean to tell you about what happened.
Exactly. History is incidental to the Vedas.
Yes, exactly. But any text you write or you find does give information about the circumstances of the writer.
Exactly.
So that is a very useful historical source. And it's not just the ugly, vicious Hindu nationalists who say that. You see, European scholars who discovered the Veda immediately started looking for history in the Veda. And so that's where you get distorted stories about, white invaders fighting against the black aboriginals. So that's a combination of the scheme that they had in their head that was at that time, you see, racism was the thing, after Darwin especially. So everybody thought like that, and then they saw this, and the words white and black were immediately read in those, according to that concept. And nobody at that time said, but you see, the Vedas is not history. No, you see, they said, no, look here, you see, they themselves attest to this particular war situation between white invaders and dark aboriginals. So You see, the interpretation that they gave at those days was wrong, but the fact that they did read the Vedas as a source of history, that was quite correct.
Yeah, and even if something is completely fiction, you
Yes.
can still find some material instances of material culture. For instance, if you take Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes stories,
Yes.
you will find trains and horse carriages, but you won't find cars.
Right.
You will not find cars. So that's very clear that you can infer something about the material culture from a writing,
Right.
whether even if it is not history.
Yes, I mean, even before you go into very specific elements of history, like description of the Battle of the Ten Kings or so, you have a general pattern. You know, you can see immediately this is not from Africa. There are no giraffes, there are no polar bears, there are no kangaroos, but you find the Indian flora
Fauna.
and fauna. And so it tells, and so the materials they use, it's not Stone Age, you know, it's not Modern Age, but it is Bronze Age.
So, to get back to this homeland issue, you see, you said that the current debate is between whether the homeland is north of the Black Sea or south of the Black Sea. Now, in all this debate that is around the Caucasus, I find that Armenia doesn't seem to figure much. Why is that?
No, don't underestimate it. First of all, from the beginning, you see, the out of India theory was absolutely dominant, but you see, there were others, and so the you know, evangelicals, or you know, whatever the equivalent at the time, Bible thumpers, you know, who took the Bible serious as a source of history, and in a large measure, it really is a good source of history.
It is correct.
But you see, they took the flood story from the Bible. That's already less historical, though again also based on some historical experience. But they say, well, in Armenia you have this Ararat, where the Ark of Noah was found. Noah had 3 sons and their wives, and so they repopulated the earth. And so the Middle East was for the
Shem.
descendants of Shem. Then the descendants of Ham, they went to Africa. And the Indo-Europeans are the descendants of Japheth. So, of course, Armenia was the homeland. So that was there already then. And strangely, the, you know, putative homeland has been wandering a little bit in that area, but now it's back in Armenia, or at least there is a school that says, you know, it was there. And it has come up, and you know, several times. And so one source that, you know, Talagiri makes the most of is the book about Indo-European and the Indo-Europeans by Gamkrelidze and Ivanov.
Okay.
You know, 2 Soviet scholars, one Russian, one Georgian, from 85 thereabouts. So they also put forward, you know, Armenia as the homeland, and they have the immigration into Europe first go all around the certainly the Black, but even the Caspian Sea. So they go to Central Asia quite far, and there are contacts with Altaic and Chinese and so on. And then they go westwards into Europe. And so that, you know, not many people were convinced by the conclusions of the book, but you see, as a source of etymologies and so on, it's very interesting. And so it gives a lot of, you know, contacts with other languages in that area, but so all centered on and in the service of an Armenian homeland.
Okay. So if the eastward migration is anterior to the westward migration from Armenia,
Yes.
then in that case it would make Tocharian earlier than Hittite. Would that become a possibility then?
It's long ago that I read that book. Uh, at any rate, it will explain why, Tocharian is so early. I don't know, I won't, posit a competition between that and Hittite. That I don't know. But so, yes, it would make it logical that Tocharian is clearly a very early language. Yes.
Okay. And then talking of Hittite, there is also this theory of Indo-Hittite,
Yes.
in which case the Hittite language split off even before Proto-Indo-European. So this is pre-Proto-Indo-European.
Yes.
What is the status of that theory today?
That is very much propagated by the Leiden School of Linguistics, Leiden in the Netherlands,
Netherlands. Okay.
which is one of the top centers of linguistic research. So I wouldn't sideline it too early. It is mainly Frederik Kortland who has developed this. Retired professor, I think he's still alive, yes. But so, that's all practically 21st century. And I mean, it has grown because it has become possible because, of course, we are getting deeper into the past. And so this question of what came before these language families can be asked, can meaningfully be asked. I mean, there have been all kinds of crazy speculations about this, but more and more this can be done seriously. So, you've had stuff like the Nostratic hypothesis,
Okay.
which says that, okay, like 6, 7, 8,000 years ago, you had these language families, Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, of which the most famous branch is Semitic, also Hamitic. You have Sino-Tibetan and so on. Now, those are in their turn branches of even earlier language families. And if you go back deep enough, you get a single language, which they call world. And so some 40 words have been identified as present in related meanings in practically all language families.
Okay, 40 words in all language families.
Yes.
40.
Suggesting that indeed there was a common origin, which is perfectly logical. Only one could reasonably despair that any remnants of that will ever be found. Now, in fact, you see, we are already advancing, and so I'm quite optimistic that knowledge of this will be established. So anyway, I mean, where we are now is beyond the present language families, one step back, and so to connect, Altaic and Uralic and Eskimo and Indo-European and Dravidian and Afro-Asiatic and bring them all back to a common origin is a very ambitious project. It's good that somebody does that, but you see most linguists stay away from it because at the moment we're not there yet.
And it must be a huge challenge because you need to at least be familiar with so many languages to detect similarities, common roots, and so on.
Yes, of course. There is this Starostin father and Starostin son from Moscow, and so they have these enormous inventories of all languages, all vocabularies of these languages and so on, and they do dare to draw conclusions from that database. So I've once heard the son give examples of this. So, he compares languages deep in Africa with languages deep in North Asia and so on, and that makes sense. And like, for instance, you heard of the Haggerty paper.
Yes, we are going to come to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, he himself, for example, has a very informed comment on that. It's quite critical, I must say. Though Haggerty himself is also a linguist at a very much higher level than what most of them have been trained in, most of us have been trained in. So the Indo-Hittite hypothesis is by far not the craziest among them, and in fact makes good sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what it says is that proto-proto or pre-proto-Indo-European and pre-proto whatever Uralic were the same language at one point, and spoken somewhere in Central Asia. Might be Bactria, the very fertile and so on area, who knows. But at any rate, those who would become the Indo-Europeans, they moved a little bit west, not sensationally, not impossibly far, but they mixed with the North Caucasian speakers. In the Caucasus you have South Caucasian, which is today mainly Georgian, more recently Circassian and other languages. And then you have Northeast Caucasian with Chechen, Ingush, lesser spoken language, but at least not entirely unknown. And then you have Northwest Caucasian, which includes also some strange names, but Circassian, historically important, now reduced to very small because that population has suffered a massacre. I think in that case you can call it a genocide, much abused term, but I think here it applies, during the Russian conquest. Anyway, but so it must have been a rather bigger language family, or spoken by more people in a greater territory. And so it's with them that the Indo-Europeans mixed, or that a branch of the Indo-European Uralic combine, that they mixed. And so the people who, after centuries, came out of it still spoke that same language, but with many characteristics from Northwest Caucasian. The one that will tell you the most, that is most colorful, let's say, is that the Northwest Caucasian languages are reputed to, or are known really, to be very sparing in the use of vowels.
Okay.
And effectively, that is a characteristic of Indo-European, in the sense that they have many consonant clusters. You see, if you compare Indo-European with Uralic or with Dravidian, you do find that those languages, and indeed very many languages in the whole world, have a pattern of consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. And by contrast, in Sanskrit especially, because you see many of the derived languages again fall back in that pattern of consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. They have a lot of clusters.
Yes. In fact, the word for woman, stri,
Yes.
that is entirely consonants ending with a vowel.
Yeah. For instance, in loan words into Sanskrit, you do find often that it is like artificially clustered that, consonants are added to make them more clustering. For example, Greek loans into astronomical vocabulary. So you have, for example, the Greek word dekanos, which means a sector of 10 degrees out of 360. So in Sanskrit that becomes drekana. The word Dravidian is derived, I don't know if that etymology is really solid, but I hear it a lot, from the word Tamil. So T becomes Dra. At any rate, I mean, take any Sanskrit text, you can see the clusters all over.
Yes.
And so in other languages, Greek and so on, this is also to a measurable extent the case. In my own language, Dutch, angstschreeuw, a cry of fear, herfststorm, an autumn storm.
So, when I went to Japan, the guide told me something very interesting, that they have McDonald's in Japan as well. But the Japanese find these clusters of consonants very difficult, like McDonald's. So they actually pronounce it ma-ku do na ru do. So clearly this cluster of consonants is a feature of Indo-European languages.
Yes, in Chinese, for example, you used to have all these clusters, and they have all disappeared. That's why Chinese is so difficult. I've studied Chinese, and so you have to, of course, to learn the script. That's also a lot of memory goes into that. But okay, it's a big job, but it's not a difficult job. The grammar is extremely easy. I think probably the easiest in the world among all languages. What makes it difficult is to speak it. You have all these homonyms, all these different syllables that have all come to coincide. And like, for example, you have a word Ming, second tone. There are 4 tones in Chinese, but that's not the problem. Those, of course, you also have to learn. But so in this case, I'm not talking about a word Ming versus another word Ming with a different tone, like Ming versus Ming. No, there's 2 exact same pronunciation. So the one word Ming means to be clear. Is the character used in the Ming dynasty. And then you have the same word which means night. Like, for instance, the name of the planet Pluto, translated from Western languages, is Ming Wang Xing, meaning the star of the king of darkness.
Okay.
Yes, so that Pluto is the god of the underworld. So you see, those people prefer to have all these homonyms and all the trouble that goes with it than to, pronounce clusters. The clusters disappeared. In Tibetan, likewise. For example, Ladakh means the high mountain pass. So the La is really Bla. And in the case of Tibetan, it so happens, the script is from like 500, 600 AD, or what do you call it? CE.